So good evening, everyone. I'm Tricia Mims, Executive Director of National Park Partners, and I'd like to thank you for joining us both here at the IMAX and via Zoom webinar for the second event in our 17th annual Moccasin Bend Lecture Series. Founded in 2006 by longtime advocate for national parks and now current member of the Tennessee House of Representatives, Mr. Greg Vital. Through his generous sponsorship, the lecture series is offered free to the public every year and features 3 speaking events with subject matter experts sharing insights on topics related to national parks and conservation, indigenous culture and history, and Chattanooga's place in the U.S. Civil War. Tonight, we continue our 2022 fall series with Anita Finger-Smith, President and CEO of Cherokee Genealogical Services. Special thanks tonight to our partners on today's program, the Tennessee chapter of the Trail of Tears Association. We also appreciate the in-kind support of the Tennessee Aquarium IMAX Theater and from Helm Projects, our partners in bringing this virtual program to you today. Our National Park Partners mission is to preserve, promote, and enhance the natural, historic, and cultural resources of Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park, including Moccasin Bend National Archaeological District. A tremendous community asset, your national park offers over 9,000 acres and 80 miles of trails to explore. Your national park offers ample outdoor space, beautiful scenery, and a calming sense of perseverance through times of hardship that provide a spiritual, emotional, and physical benefit to residents and visitors alike. After the difficult year of 2020, we are thankful for the return of in-person national park interpretive programming. And I would be remiss not to mention the upcoming National Park Service programs commemorating the 159th anniversary of the battles for Chattanooga in November. However, many silver linings came from those long months of the pandemic, including the ability for us to now broadcast this lecture series virtually to dozens of viewers at home. National Park Partners is proud to continue supporting opportunities for self-guided exploration, including the popular cell phone tours and Find a Regiment Battlefield app that allow visitors to engage with Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park on their own time and pace. National Park Service virtual content of the Campaign for Chattanooga anniversary commemorations recorded out of necessity during the pandemic will now provide ranger curated content to thousands of school children in Hamilton, Walker, and Catoosa counties through our National Park Partners Community Engagement and Education Program funded by the National Park Foundation. These technologies are highly beneficial for many reasons, yet there is no replacing being in the park. And I'm not alone in feeling that way, as more than 950,000 visitors come to Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park in 2021 alone, providing an economic impact exceeding $80 million. In addition to forming the stories that shaped our city, our national park continues to be a major contributor to our local economy and our quality of life. With us tonight is Park Superintendent Brad Bennett. Please join me in thanking Brad and the National Park Service for their dedication to the stewardship, interpretation, and preservation of Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park. Now I would like to introduce Greg Vital, founder and sponsor of the Moccasin Bend Lecture Series. Greg is a true champion of conservation as both a landowner who forever preserved his property and as the president of the board of the Land Trust for Tennessee. Greg has visited around 350 national parks and recently served as president of the National Parks Conservation Association. Greg has been a steadfast and generous supporter, first of the Friends of Moccasin Bend and the Friends of Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park, and now of National Park Partners, formed when the two groups officially joined forces in 2018. Greg recently won election to the Tennessee legislature, where he serves the 29th district in the House of Representatives. Please join me in welcoming Greg Vital.
Thank you, Tricia. And really all I want to say tonight is thank you to Tricia for the wonderful job she does throughout the year running our National Park Partners organization. It's our friends organization that supports both the National Park unit and its other organizations around town and Moccasin Bend. So I appreciate what you do day in and day out for all of us. Brad and the staff of the National Park Service, thank you for what you do. And tonight is going to be a wonderful opportunity for us to hear a unique perspective of that Cherokee history and issues related to the removal. And as we talk about some of the issues tonight on the Trail of Tears and the events that evolved from the Trail of Tears, I hope that we provide new insights and reflection on those that went before us. So thank you for being here tonight, and thank you for supporting our national parks in Chattanooga. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you to your mom, Rita, who never misses a single lecture in 17 years. Miss Rita Vidal, we got to give her a hand. Now it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Anita Finger-Smith. She has been a genealogical and historical researcher for more than 25 years, specializing in Cherokee resources, manuscripts, and record analysis related to the Cherokee in the Southeast. She is the president and CEO of Cherokee Genealogical Services, a business licensed by the Eastern Band of the Cherokee Indians. Anita has served as a board member for the National and North Carolina Trail of Tears Association for more than a decade. When not attending to research, she takes care of duties as co-owner of Bear Meets Indian Den, an authentic Native American arts and crafts gallery located on the Qualla boundary in Cherokee, North Carolina. Please join me in welcoming Anita Finger-Smith.
Ethnogenesis. Ethnogenesis is the process by which a group of people become ethnically distinct. Good evening. As previously stated, my name is Anita Finger-Smith. Finger's the birthright portion, excuse me, of my surname. It was inherited from an ancestor who was an 18th century German immigrant. Smith is the birthright portion of my husband's surname, who is an enrolled member of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. Though I have a business license through the tribe, I do not speak on their behalf. I am an independent researcher and present as such. Before we begin, I'd like to offer a couple disclaimers. First, due to the historic nature of this talk, I will use verbiage that might seem politically offensive in the present day, but keep in mind it is a historic talk. Second, if you use or share any of the graphics from the handout or from the screenshots, please be sure to include appropriate credits for those who designed. And lastly, tonight I've been given a finite amount of time for my talk, so I will stick to my talking points with only a few sidebars. Those in attendance who know me can attest that I can quickly veer off on a tangent and down a rabbit hole if given ample time. The widely held belief that today's Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians are descendants of those who fled to the mountains and eluded federal troops in 1838 is a distortion and an oversimplification of a very complex episode in Cherokee history. During this talk, I will cover 5 circumstances during the early 19th century that contributed to the nucleus of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. Hopefully, the presentation will clear up some of the misconceptions as to why some of the Cherokee in North Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, and Alabama remained in the East after the forced removal of other Cherokee to lands west of the Mississippi River. But first, I want to give you a brief background of the historical periods assigned by the federal government as they relate to the North Carolina Cherokee. Keeping in mind, the North Carolina historical periods are fairly well aligned to those of the old Cherokee Nation as a whole. the contact period from 1670 to 1710, the colonial period from 1710 to 1785, the federal period from 1785 to 1820, and the nationalist period from 1820 to 1835. And then the removal period from 1835 to 1839. During what's referred to as the colonial period, the Cherokee formed a relatively egalitarian communalistic society. This simply means they were living in communities aiming for equal means for all their people by growing, hunting, and gathering. As shown in this artist rendition from the National Geographic documentary 500 Nations, Cherokee settlement patterns were varied with individual homesteads, small villages, and clustered towns along waterways. In that period in time, the waterways were the interstates. So keeping in mind the historic period there, towns were defined by the presence of a townhouse or public building, which was the focal point of civil, political, and religious activity. Summer and winter homes ringed a central plaza, which was used for ceremony, dances, and games. This rendition was attributed to the overhill town of Chota, located in present-day Monroe County, Tennessee. When the Europeans arrived, the indigenous peoples of North America encountered explorers, mission settlements, fur traders, residents and itinerant missionaries, and nomadic adventurers. The most significant factor in the transformation of the Native American Southwest was the decimation of the population by diseases brought to this new world by these Europeans. Demographers generally agree that the Native American population declined by at least 90% after 1500. This depopulation wreaked havoc on the social and political structure of the Southeast. By the middle of the 18th century, only a few prominent tribes, the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Creeks, and the Seminoles, and a few smaller groups had emerged from this process of decimation. And by the dawn of the 18th century, these 5 emerging tribal nations had laid their territorial claims throughout the southeastern region of the continent. The Cherokee claimed parts of what are now current day North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, and Tennessee. They also claimed parts of what is now Kentucky, Virginia, and West Virginia, but only as their hunting grounds. So if you'll notice on this map, when I had Lamar to design this map, I had always seen this perimeter of the Cherokee Nation, but it didn't really hit home with me until I asked him, could you overlay this onto a map that has the current day state borders and the current day counties within those states? And then it began making a little bit more sense what this perimeter of the Cherokee Nation was. I have this map highlighted with North Carolina because that's predominantly where we're going to talk today. And this little dot right there is the current day town of Cherokee. So if you'll kind of look at this horizontal line here, lands above that horizontal line, there was not Cherokee villages there. There were temporary shelter for a winter of hunting, but that was hunting grounds. The Cherokee shared this area over in here with hunting grounds with the Chickasaw, and very peacefully shared those hunting grounds. Over in here, they shared hunting grounds with the Shawnee, and it wasn't quite so peaceful in those lands at that time. Unfortunately, there were very few records kept of the Cherokee people prior to their relationship with the United States. Most written accounts available from this contact period from 1670 to 1710 are diaries and journals of non-Indian explorers. I went ahead and added this map just to show you where the towns and villages were. This is your Cherokee villages and towns. I talked about this being hunting grounds. We're also seeing this area of Tennessee. We do see some of these towns starting to spread out a little bit more after removal, but right here is your nucleus of Cherokee villages at the time, and down here at the time of 1760. During the colonial period ranging from 1710 to 1780, which was well after the mound builder periods, town clusters within the Cherokee Nation were described mainly by river drainage systems. They included the lower towns, along the upper Savannah River and its tributaries, the overhill towns along the upper Tennessee and lower Little Tennessee rivers. The North Carolina Cherokee settlements were designated as the out towns, middle towns, and valley towns. The valley towns were along the upper Hiawassee, the Nantahala, and the Valley rivers. The middle towns were situated along the upper Little Tennessee River drainage basin, and the out towns were along the Oconaluftee and Tuckasegee rivers. The out towns were located where the current day Cherokee or Qualla boundary is located, or also known as the Cherokee Indian Reservation. In 1721, Francis Vennard, a foreign missionary, enumerated 53 Cherokee towns in the Southeast, totaling 10,379 souls. This was in a correspondence he had sent back to England. Vennard titled the census "A True and Exact Account of the Number and Names of all the Towns Belonging to the Cherokee Nation, and the number of men, women, and children inhabiting the same, taken anno 1721. I'm going to point out several people in the audience today was at a recent conference in North Carolina for the Trail of Tears Association. And we had one of the celebrations at a local mound, and it was at the town of Gadua. And I went ahead and put this in here. So in 1721, there were 143 men, 93 women, and 47 children, totaling 283 on those grounds where y'all had ceremony during that conference. By the time this census was taken, the Cherokee had adopted many of the items offered by the European traders. They have firearms, they have gunpowder, they are trading metal tools and implements, cotton, wool, glass. These trade goods made much of the day-to-day life easier and more productive for the Cherokee people. And by the middle of the 18th century, the Cherokee had fallen into a state of dependency upon European suppliers. With more and more European settlers arriving in the area, by the end of the colonial period, the Cherokee tribe had lost over half of its vast homeland through a series of treaties. So again, these treaties, I'm getting there. These treaties now have, if you notice, the inside of this perimeter is now the Cherokee lands during the colonial periods after these series of treaties with the colonies. And if you will notice, what they had ceded first were their hunting grounds. With using more and more European goods, hunting grounds wasn't quite as needed as before. The federal period from 1785 to 1820 was an era of rapid change for much of the Cherokee Nation throughout the Southeast. The first 2 decades of the 19th century witnessed attempts by the Americans to civilize the Cherokees. An economic and social change of the Cherokee was led by the mixed bloods in the Overhill towns here in Tennessee and the lower settlements, while the valley, middle, and out towns of North Carolina were much less affected by contact with and pressure from the Anglo-Americans. This was based largely on their geographic isolation. This region in North Carolina contained a larger proportion of full-bloods, less wealth, and less exposure to Christianity than most of the remainder of the nation. In 1808, George Barber Davis was hired by Colonel Return Jonathan Meigs, the United States agent to the Cherokee, to record a census of the Cherokee Nation. Davis, speaking about the Cherokee towns in North Carolina, stated, "I had no idea that there were such Indians as there are over those hills and in those valleys. They are at least 20 years behind the rest of the nation." Beginning in 1816, many Cherokees who disagreed with how to deal with these Americans and their land cessions voluntarily enrolled themselves to move west. By the 1820s, several thousand Cherokees had voluntarily relocated in present-day Arkansas and Oklahoma. Moving forward in this talk, I will primarily reference the North Carolina Cherokee. It is where most of the Eastern Band Cherokee remain today, and it is where the EBCI, Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, was established. The settlement pattern, as it was known to the North Carolina Cherokee, was about to change dramatically. In 1817 and 1819, treaties were signed between the United States and the Cherokee to compensate for the large area of land that the United States had made available for those Cherokee who had moved west into Arkansas, present-day Arkansas and Oklahoma. The region around the middle and outtown was included in this land cession. The green outline is the current North Carolina state line. This red arc is an approximation of the treaty line for the 1817 and 1819 treaty. And the valley towns are the only towns remaining within the Cherokee Nation. So if this is the treaty line here, these towns over here are no longer within the Cherokee Nation. In North Carolina, the only towns still within the Cherokee Nation are the valley towns. In 1809, the Meg census of the entire Cherokee Nation totaled 12,395 people. On this census, there were 1,065 Cherokee who were enumerated in the middle and out towns, in these two towns here. This would indicate that there were 1,065 North Carolina Cherokee who are living outside of the Cherokee Nation. By the way, those of you who might be interested in that MEG survey, the 1809 MEG survey is housed in the Moravian Archives in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And again, it is a census of the entire Cherokee Nation. The 1819 treaty states, the United States agrees to pay, according to the Treaty of July the 8th, 1817, for all valuable improvements on land within the country ceded by the Cherokee, and to allow a reservation of 640 acres, which is 1 square mile, to each head of a family who elects to become a citizen of the United States. There were 91 middle and out-town heads of Cherokee household who filed a claim for a 640-acre reservation in order to protect their ancient mounds and towns, such as Gadua, Nikwasi, Watauga, Cowee. They agreed to submit to the laws of the states, which not only made them United States citizens, it made them eligible for North Carolina citizenship. They became known as the Citizen Cherokee. 51 reserves or reservations were authorized to be surveyed. The state of North Carolina quickly surveyed all of these Cherokee lands that are now out of the Cherokee Nation in the United States within the state of North Carolina. So the state of North Carolina comes in and surveys all of the land in order for a land sales. In doing so, now remember, we have 51 reservations out in here. 51 heads of Cherokee household who were given 640-acre reservation. When North Carolina surveyed the lands for a land sale, they surveyed all of these 640-acre reservations. In June of 1820, records show there were 80 families, 687 individuals remaining on the treaty lands being surveyed. North Carolina law permitted the white settlers who purchased the lands to forcefully remove the Cherokee citizens from their land. One account of such an incident was documented in the 1842 testimony of Gideon Morris, in which he stated, Gideon Morris, was compelled to leave home for a short time, leaving his wife and children on the said place. Immediately after he left, his house was attacked by the said Robert Love and other persons with him. It was torn down and burnt, and his family turned adrift in cold weather. The whole of his bedding, provisions, and clothing being destroyed in the fire. Gideon Morris and his wife, Naka, or Rebecca Katatahi, their 640-acre reservation was centered around the old Cherokee town and mound of Nikwasi. In August of 1824, North Carolina negotiated with the citizen Cherokee a contract for payment for their 640-acre reservations and allowed them to settle elsewhere. So where did they settle? Some of the citizen Cherokee moved into the valley towns, which is still within the Cherokee Nation. But most of the citizen Cherokee settled near a site outside of the Cherokee Nation, which was known as Quallatown or Oconaluftee, which is the current day town of Cherokee. The national period, 1820 to 1835. The Quallatown Cherokee living outside of the Cherokee Nation, who were living quietly among their few white neighbors, abiding by the laws of North Carolina, and just wanted to be left alone. In 1830, just a year after taking office, President Andrew Jackson pushed a piece of legislation called the Indian Removal Act through both houses of Congress. It gave the president the power to negotiate a removal treaty with Indian tribes living east of the Mississippi River. Under these treaties, the Indians were to give up their lands east of the Mississippi in exchange for lands in the west. Before arrangements could be made for immigration, it was necessary to conduct a survey to gather information regarding the Cherokee population and other matters. So a prelude to the removal was the 1835 Cherokee Census, and it was authorized by the federal government. And according to this census, 3,644 Cherokee lived in North Carolina. This included those in Quallatown. Nathaniel Smith, the official census taker for North Carolina, wrote the following: I found the balance of those families consisting of 233 souls who have left their country and settled among the whites. In this statement, Smith was referring to the citizen Cherokee who had left the Cherokee Nation and settled among the whites in Quallatown as a result of being forced off their 640-acre reservation. By the way, the 1835 Cherokee census is often referred to as the Henderson Roll. That title is inaccurate. Major Benjamin Curry, the superintendent of Cherokee removal, he appointed 5 census takers. Nathaniel Smith was the census taker for North Carolina. George Underwood and Charles Nelson were the census takers for Georgia. Resin Rawlins was the census taker for Alabama, and Daniel Henderson was the census taker for Tennessee. Daniel Henderson's Tennessee census was listed first on the original census. Hence, it has always been erroneously referred to as the Henderson Roll. Again, it is the 1835 Cherokee census. Moving on to the removal period, which occurred with the signing of the infamous Treaty of New Uchula on December the 29th, 1835. Article 12 of this treaty contained somewhat of a loophole. Those individuals and families of the Cherokee Nation that are adverse to removal to the Cherokee country west of the Mississippi and are desirous to become citizens of the states where they reside and such are qualified to take care of themselves, meaning any Cherokee choosing to remain would have to acquire their own land and otherwise fend for themselves. This loophole would soon aid the North Carolina Cherokee in their opposition to removal. This wraps up our overview of the historic periods leading to the 5 circumstances that contributed to the nucleus of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. I will now introduce each of those 5 circumstances in chronological order. The first circumstance is a direct result of those treaties of 1817 and 1819 discussed earlier. The treaty stated, allow a reservation of 640 acres to each head of a family who elects to become a citizen of the United States. Remember, the state of North Carolina surveyed and sold these 640-acre reservations that were claimed by the Cherokee. The white settlers, remember, they forced them off their lands, and many moved into Quallatown outside of the Cherokee Nation. In 1836, Attorney William Holland Thomas agreed to represent the Indians of Quallatown and a few nearby settlements. He was to inform the federal government that these Cherokee citizens living in Quallatown outside of the Cherokee Nation intended to stay in North Carolina, and he was there to obtain their share of the treaty benefits. He was to keep a percentage as his compensation and then purchase land and other necessity for the Quallatown Indians. Because of the Quallatown Indians' unusual citizenship status, Thomas won recognition of their right from both the United States government officials and the treaty party of the Cherokee Nation. This ensured that they were not legally subject to the forced Cherokee removal. In September of 1837, "60 Qualitown heads of families representing 333 Indians were granted preliminary approval to remain in the East." So let me summarize that again. So the Qualitown Indians hired William Holland Thomas to go, number one, to go to Washington and tell the federal government that they intended to stay where they were. Number two, to get their share of the money, because the treaty did not stipulate that only those Cherokee who removed received the benefit. The treaty stipulated all Cherokee were to receive the benefits. And three, he was to keep some of the money for his services. Number four, use the remaining money to purchase land in his name in reserve for the Qualitown citizen Cherokee, because at this time, Cherokee could not purchase land in North Carolina. So the first circumstance contributing to the ethnogenesis of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indian are the citizen Cherokee. The second circumstance that contributed to the nucleus of the Eastern Band is the North Carolina Cherokee who possessed proper certificates exempting them from the removal. When the Army began the forced removal of Cherokee citizens from North Carolina on June 12, 1838, most Cherokee living inside the Cherokee Nation submitted peacefully to the arrest and deportation along roads that had been built by the Army. Some families with white members had dual citizenship in North Carolina and Cherokee Nation and were exempt from removal. An early Cherokee Nation statute passed in 1819 required a white man to get a license from the Cherokee National Clerk to marry a Cherokee woman through a minister or other authorized person. Then they could become recognized as Cherokee citizens within the Cherokee Nation. These individuals became known as Cherokee countrymen. White men married to a Cherokee woman known as the Cherokee countryman. In North Carolina, if the head of the house, and other states as well, if the head of the household was white, the spouse Cherokee, the children were mixed blood. The white head of household was one, a North Carolina citizen. He's a white man or woman. I'm kind of, there were a few that were white women married to Cherokee men. So they were a North Carolina citizen. Two, they could legally hold land in North Carolina because they were white. And three, the entire family was exempt from the Removal Act. Other Cherokees obtained immigration waivers from officials such as Preston Stirrett, a federal enrolling agent, who, according to General Eustis, was granting permission to some hundreds of Indians to remain in the country. He has been for several days at Welch's on Valley River distributing permission to Indians coming from Fort Lindsay and Camp Scott under charge of the soldiers. The waivers or permits were mostly issued to the old and sick. Valley River, North Carolina, July 2, 1838. Agreeably to the instructions of the Commissioner of Indian Affairs communicated in the foregoing letter, Wakey, an old woman, Edisty, her son, his son Kanasaki, and his wife Anna are permitted to remain and become citizens. So the second occurrence contribute to the ethnogenesis of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians are the exempted Cherokee. Those intermarried families with dual citizenship and individuals with permits. The third circumstance that contributed to the nucleus of the Eastern Band are the North Carolina Cherokee who were members of Uchula's band. When federal troops and state militia came to the mountains of North Carolina to capture Cherokees in June of 1838, the Cherokee people of Nantahala Town, located on the lower Nantahala River Valley, were one group who lived inside the Cherokee Nation, but they did not submit peacefully and fled into the mountains. Led by their headman Uchula, the Nantahala Cherokee had evaded troops for months. The army feared that Uchula's band might turn guerrilla warfare and returned in September of 1838 to pursue these fugitives. The troops eventually captured dozens of the Cherokee, including Uchula's old neighbor, Solly, and his extended family. When Solly, his sons, and sons-in-law killed two of their captors and escaped, the military scope intensified. Solly and his band were finally brought into the army camp by other Cherokee who feared that the manhunt might escalate into a full-scale war. After Solly, his sons, and sons-in-laws were executed in November, Colonel William S. Foster issued a proclamation that granted amnesty to Uchula and his group. Instructions from General Winfield Scott permitted to remain in North Carolina. This document shows the number and names of Uchula's band who was permitted to remain in North Carolina, counted up to be around 100 Cherokee. Uchula and his band joined the Quallatown Indians and helped to establish the Wolftown community, the community in which I reside today. Only Uchula's band directly benefited from the Solly incident. And if you've ever been to the drama in Cherokee, you will see that it might be alluded as otherwise, but only Uchula's band was exempted. The third circumstances contributing to the ethnogenesis of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians is Uchula's band of Cherokee. The fourth circumstance that contributes to the nucleus of the Eastern Band in North Carolina are those who resisted removal. By the end of 1838, the majority of Cherokee had been rounded up and were already in the West. Those Cherokee who had avoided removal by evading the soldiers in their mountainous hideouts were dismissed by the War Department as not worth the trouble and expense to remove and could remain in their homeland. The soldiers were delighted to retreat from the laurel hills they had been crawling through, trying to round up the fugitive Cherokee. After the military withdrawal, approximately 800 Cherokee resided in and around Quallatown, mostly on that property that William Holland Thomas had bought on their behalf in his name. Another 300 North Carolina Cherokee were scattered along the Choa Valley and Hiawassee rivers, making the total of about 1,100 Cherokee remaining in the state of North Carolina after removal. Another 300 or so Cherokee resided in nearby states of Georgia, Tennessee, and Alabama. These included a number of mixed bloods and whites who were Cherokee only by marriage, those Cherokee countrymen and their families. The total number of Cherokee remaining in the Southeast then was about 1,400. I want to talk a little bit about those 300 or so who avoided removal, who evaded the soldiers. I've had several people verbally denounce my statements that Cherokee hid in the mountains. Additionally, I have read many social media posts stating that Cherokee did not hide out or hide in the mountains. I don't argue with these individuals, it just causes drama. But I would like to offer you two of many documents that support my statements and let you make your own conclusion. Winfield Scott, Athens, Tennessee, November the 9th, 1838. Early in August, after he and those troops, that's the 1st and 4th Artillery, were too far off to be recalled, I learned that a number of Indians had, in that mountainous region, escaped the well-known vigilance of himself and officers. That number has since been determined to have been 300 men, women, and children, and 40 or 50 joined them, runaways, from the principal depot at the agency. Winfield Scott. Memorial of Dickageeski, chief of the Buffalo Town. And when the troops commenced immigrating, the Cherokee, your memorialist, meaning Dickageeski, had planted his crops. And when the troops commenced collecting, he with his family kept out of the way. Your memorialist property was all taken, and he and his family were deprived of the means of substance and compelled to exist on the sap of the trees and roots. And nearly all the children belonging to his people died. Only about 2 children remained out of a population of nearly 100 persons. The fourth circumstance contributing to the ethnogenesis of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians are those who, according to my research and documents, fled into the hills and resisted removal. The fifth circumstance that contributed to the nucleus of the Eastern Band are those who returned after being removed. Though the exact number remains undocumented of the Cherokee who returned to North Carolina after being forcefully removed, we have ample documentation showing that there were countless during the military roundup and in the years that followed. One such case was that of a Battle of Horseshoe Bend warrior named Junaluska. He was being removed in the Bushy Head Detachment, and in late October of 1838, some correspondences from H.L. Scott to Winfield Scott reveals that 50 persons under Junaluska had deserted the Bushy Head Detachment while about 13 miles from McMinnville, with the intention of returning to North Carolina and thence joining the Cherokee at Quallatown. Bushy Head continued to explain that it wasn't his duty to go after them. You know, he was leading to the detachment, but his job description did not say he was supposed to be going to chase anybody. 5 days later, Second Lieutenant Richard Graham, whom Winfield Scott had ordered to detail a search party, announced that he had succeeded in capturing Junaluska and half of the escapees and planned to return them to the agency. And the agency was at Fort Cass, or current-day Charleston, Tennessee. Graham states in a subsequent letter that Walking Deer was the leader of the other half of the escaped party. Graham declares that he has the means to capture them if he can just find them. Within a month after returning to the agency, Junaluska was mustered in the last group of Cherokee to leave Fort Cass. He was listed as a prisoner in Drew's detachment who traveled by the water. This detachment included Principal Chief John Ross and his family as well. Junaluska remained in Indian Territory for about 2 years before he returned to his homeland in North Carolina. Another well-documented group of who deserted from the immigration camps at Rattlesnake Springs was Standing Wolf and his extended family. On September the 4th, 1838, Major General Winfield Scott wrote to the Secretary of War saying, "To this impatience, in great part, it is to attribute the recent escape back to their old settlements of 8 or 10 families of North Carolina Indians," in which he was referring to Standing Wolf and his group. Dr. Brett Riggs presented a program on the return of Standing Wolf during the Trail of Tears Association meeting last September. And you can find a link to this talk on the National Trail of Tears Association website. You can just Google National TOTA and listen to this entire talk. Shown on this slide are 2 direct descendants of Standing Wolf. Granddaughter, Rebecca Youngbird, and a 3rd great-grandson, beloved man, Jerry Wolf. Also in this picture, Jim Woodpecker, were Conisoti, and family who escaped en route to Indian Territory and returned to establish the post-removal enclave of Cherokee at Sandtown in the Cartucajay community. Another who returned, Nick Screaming Bear. Nick was removed from the Chiowa Valley along with his aging parents. While camping on the banks of the Mississippi River, Nick escaped and returned to Quallatown and became the progenitor of all the present-day Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians with the surname of Crow and many others. His elderly father, Screaming Bear, continued on to Indian Territory. Once in Indian Territory, he became known as Bear Crier or Crying Bear. The fifth and final circumstance contributing to the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians are the Cherokee who returned to their homeland. So that is the 5 circumstances contributing to the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians.
Thank you so much, Anita. I know we have time for a few questions. It's a little hard to see with the spotlight, so if you kind of wave, not just raise your hand, but wave it, we'll get your questions answered. Well, I have a question.
I will see if I can.
I know you focus mostly on the North Carolina side, but obviously this area was part of Cherokee Nation in Tennessee. So I'm curious if anything you know about.
So when I talked about the treaties of 1817 and 1819, and I used to talk about North Carolina selling surveying the land and selling that. Each state handled that treaty in their own way. And I do not know how each state did handle that treaty. However, that was just the first circumstance there, but it could be easily researched, I'm sure. But there was the opportunity for the 640-acre reserves, how they handled, the state of Tennessee handled those reserves. I'm not familiar with that. However, when you look at the intermarried whites, the laws with the Cherokee countrymen marrying a white man marrying a Cherokee one, that same law is in effect. So if you kind of fast forward a little bit into those who resisted by hiding, the majority of the Cherokee who remained in Tennessee, Georgia, and Alabama were intermarried whites, so they didn't have to hide. Those people who hid were documented. I often hear sometimes somebody say, oh, well, my ancestor hid in the mountains and nobody ever knew they was. No, those people were documented. We know who those people were. So that resistance effort in the perimeter states isn't quite as evident as it is in North Carolina. Those who return, there are those who returned and came back all the way up until 1880. There was 2 more large groups of Cherokee who went out voluntarily after the forced removal. They could go out until 1880 and automatically become citizens of the Cherokee Nation and Indian Territory. After that, they had to petition there. So there was a lot of moving forward and backward from the time of removal till 1880, when some families would go, come back, go and come back. So that happened in Tennessee quite a bit as well. But that one question about the 1817, 1819 treaty and the 640-acre reserves would be a good question to research for one of you Tennessee researchers. Yes, sir.
Yes, was there any exemptions given to the Indians who would fight with the federal troops or during the French Indian War? Was there any British citizenship kind of transferred to America?
No.
Okay.
So the only one that I am familiar with, I shouldn't have said no straight out. I should say the only one I'm familiar with is, we talked about Junaluska. He was given for his service in the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. He was given land in by the state of North Carolina in North Carolina, but that is the only one that I am familiar with.
Till when the Eastern Band became a nation,
Pardon?
when the Eastern Band became.
So the question was just asked when the Eastern Band became a nation. So it was right shortly after the Civil War in 1869. The Eastern Band became a separate nation from the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma. So there was a long flux of time there from the time of the removal to when the Eastern Band was federally recognized in 1869, that they were just really in flux. They had no tribe. They were not members of any political alignment with anybody. So they were really in flux. And that the fellow I talked about, William Holland Thomas, he was really more or less an agent for him. There's a lot of Google things out there that says he was the white chief of the North Carolina Cherokee. He was never a chief, but he was an agent, an attorney for them, and an activist for them. And he held land in his name for them until they could use the treaty money that he was able to get awarded to them for the lands to go back to them. And that's what the Qualla boundary is today, is lands that was held by William Holland Thomas in his name in right of the Cherokee. So if you're familiar with the North Carolina area, you have that large a base of land where the town of Cherokee is, which is called the Qualla boundary. There is also tribal land in Cherokee, current day Cherokee County, which is not the town of Cherokee. The town of Cherokee is I started to say reservation, that's not a good term. The Qualla boundary is split between Jackson County and Swain County. Cherokee County is out near Murphy, and Graham County is out near Robbinsville. There are tribal lands out in there, but it's checkerboard. So those were lands that was still in the Cherokee. Remember that green line? So those lands that are still on the left side of that line, if the Cherokee was removed, went west and never came back, or did not elude the troops, or did not have a certificate, or did not have a permit, or was not intermarried, that means that piece of land was sold to white people and it forever stayed with the white people. But if they had hid in the mountains and William Holland Thomas bought that piece of property in his name, reserved it for them until they could own land in North Carolina, then the lands out in those two counties today is checkerboard land. So land that William Holland, so for instance, Junaluska. So he bought land, held it in reserve until Junaluska, I don't know. He lived long enough. He died. He was really old and he died right in there. So his little piece of land is still there. I took Robin to the little marker yesterday. Whereas Screaming Bear, he was removed. The piece of land he lived on right now is not tribal land. But next door to him, where Dickageeski was, he did hide in the mountains. You saw testimony. William Holland Thomas bought his land. When he could own land, then that piece of land goes. So the lands are checkerboard in North Carolina. As far as the perimeter states, so there's kind of two big episodes that happened with the citizenship of Cherokees in the perimeter states. First of all, after removal, there was nothing left for them. There's no options except for them to live there or to go on out, come back or whatever. But when the Eastern Band was formed and a enumeration was done, it included all of the Cherokee in the perimeter states. So they're still recognized as Cherokee, even though they're not living on tribal lands. And continued to be that way until 1924. In 1924, the final roll was taken, and it's still the base roll for all enrolled members today. And it's the 1924 Baker Roll. The 1924 Baker Roll had a residency clause in it. So any Cherokee living outside the state of North Carolina had to be living in a county contiguous to the state line of North Carolina to still be eligible for membership in the Eastern Band. So there was quite a few Georgia, Tennessee, and Alabama people who at that time became disenrolled just because of where they lived. Rabun County, Georgia, here in Tennessee, I was trying to swing around there, but there was nobody left in Cobb County, Tennessee, living there. But the perimeter counties were fine. But once you get to Hamilton County, it's no longer right. So if a Cherokee was living in 1924, if a Cherokee was living in Hamilton County, they were no longer eligible for enrollment in the Eastern Band of Cherokee. Yeah.
Last one for tonight, but we'll be in the lobby afterwards for more questions, but last one for this room.
I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I'm trying to project. My question is, please, ma'am, what are some of your source document suggestions for people interested in researching? Where would you send us?
What are you researching?
Well,
Are you researching?
Don Brown, but we just had a fall break camp with children learning about legends of Chattanooga, and they had great questions. And they had questions I couldn't answer, and I was hoping you might suggest some source documents or some places that next time they ask me questions, I will have an answer.
So
Right.
we have done a lot of research in various repositories throughout the United States. Harvard University has a lot of the foreign mission records, which is just absolutely packed full of information. The Moravians have a lot of information, but if you will email me, I will give you a good long list of repositories that have those documents in it. Yes, yes, ma'am.
I'd like to say that your local public library has some of the best collections in the whole Southeast.
Well, I did send them there,
And
but
also,
So, and I will add, we have researched in the Tennessee State Archives and at the Knoxville branch. There's a lot in those Penelope Allen. Don't ever forget your public libraries. People donate there. They're just spread out well, even foreign records. Bernard's record is a foreign record.
we've got the Harvard records on microfilm there.
She has the Harvard records on microfilm there. So you don't even have to go to Harvard. But we had a great trip.
Thank you so much.